Hello, and welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast. My name is Matthew Harvey.
And my name is Stephen A. Mackay.
We are both best-selling historical fiction authors, and together we chat about all things historical and anything that could fall under the banner of action and adventure in books, film, TV, and games.
Oh, and we also talk about rock music from time to time.
There are a few names in the historical fiction space that most people instantly recognise. One of them is Bernard Cornwell, who we interviewed a few weeks ago. And of our guest today, Bernard said in his endorsement of his debut novel, Under the Eagle, "I really don't need this kind of competition." Since then, Simon Scarrow has become a household name and published more than 50 books, I think, but I'm struggling to count them all. You can tell us the exact number if you know. Simon's longest running series is Eagles of the Empire, epic Roman historical fiction featuring Macro and Cato, now up to 21 books. He's also written novels about Wellington and Napoleon, thrillers set in the Second World War, many historical action and adventures with co-author T.J. Andrews, and some standalone novels set in different eras from the 16th to the 20th century. Welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, Simon.
Hi. Hello, Simon.
Hi. It's actually 37 novels.
37 novels, and I guess I was counting all the T.J. Andrews stuff as well. That includes them as well, does
the
it?
Grand total, yeah, including the young adult fiction too. So,
all right, I don't know where I got the number from. Then maybe I just can't.
Maybe
count,
German editions or something that you've just counted up.
Yeah, no, it's called. Fiction writing is. There's a reason why it's called fiction writing.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the 21st novel of the Eagles of the Empire series, Death to the Emperor. Could you tell us a bit about that book, which I believe is your latest book? It's just come out recently, right?
Yeah, it's out last month. And yeah, this is one I've been waiting to write for a number of years, actually, because it's set in this neck of the woods. Well, I say this. Well, yes. Right, well, around Norfolk, East Anglia. So it's about the Boudiccan Revolt, and something I've been building up. And you'll know this as a series writer yourself. You kind of seed the future novels with characters and possibilities, and then when they eventually get around to writing that book, it looks like you've been awfully clever. So Boudica was there in the second book, and then she's been in a few other books. And of course, now we're at the point of the Boudiccan Revolt. So it's also something because I suppose I've been waiting so long to write it. I got a bit carried away, and it's about 15,000 words longer than normal, just because there's just so much material, and we're only up to the sacking of Colchester. The grand finale is yet to come, so that'll be the next book.
So how long? So incidentally, how long is a normal Simon Scarrow novel?
Well, it tends to be about 130,000 words to 132,000 in the first draft. And then by the time the editor's taken her scalpel to it, and I've relented, it's down to about 124 or so. It used to be, a much longer process, but I think after a while, you kind of second guess what the editor's going to say. And then she's kind of like perched on your shoulder, that kind of good little angel thing and the bad little verbose person there. And you eventually get to the stage where you can sort of second guess pretty much how she's going to react and save yourself a bit of time writing the first draft. But this time around, I made two mistakes. I got carried away. And then the second one was I for some reason, I was typing in 10 point. And of course, that's less pages. I said, well, I'm not getting anywhere very fast. And then I kind of realized why.
So that shows that you must write in, well, it could be different programs, but I'm guessing you write in Word then, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I used to write in Word. I had a 2007 version of it, which I really, really liked. It didn't have too many bells and whistles on and allowed you to get on with the job. And then it turns out that Microsoft doesn't do backwards compatibility with its Word files. So I had to get one of these, that new thing. Was it 365?
Yeah, Office 365, I think.
Yeah. So now I have to, it really makes, really hurts. You have to pay for it every year.
Yeah, £6 a month.
Yeah, well, I stopped using. I mean, I have to use Word a bit because in the editing phase, all the editors still use it, so they want it. But I use Scrivener to write.
I was going to ask because I've got that on the machine now because I'm writing a musical at the moment. Ooh. And I'm trying to find some good software. And somebody, try Scrivener. You can do everything with Scrivener. So how are you getting on with it?
Well, I wrote my first novel. I wrote 26,000 words in Word. And then I just thought, I can't do this anymore. It's awful. I hate this bit of software. And bearing in mind, at the time I was working in IT as a technical writer, so we had to use Word sometimes, but we were using other tools, to do the writing. And I just thought there must be something better out here that will serve my needs. So I went out and did a bit of research and found Scrivener, which I much preferred, and I've never looked back. So ever since then, so that was 8 years ago or something, and I've been using Scrivener ever since. It's just, it's brilliant. I mean, there's a lot. We could probably have a whole episode just talking about Scrivener. Maybe we should. Yeah. Maybe we should have an episode talking about different. Get an expert in of Scrivener or something and talk about it. But without going into too much detail, you break down everything into separate little files. So each chapter is a file. Each scene within the chapter is a file. So it becomes much easier to move things around, and you can put your research in as well. Have it all within the same big sort of overarching file structure. So you can search for things very easily, and you can reorder things, and it's not what you see is what you get. So what you're writing is just text, and at the end you decide how to output it, and you can output to any format, including Word. And say break it up into these structures and put chapter headings and whatever you can decide, what the metadata is, and then
it doesn't take too long to get used to it. Or
well, it didn't to me, but I mean, I'm probably only using about 10-15% of what it can do. But I think
sounds very
most of these things
to me.
You don't need to use most of it. I think people get hung up on trying to learn everything of a bit of software. It's like when you get Photoshop or something, you look at it and you think this has got like a million things you could do, but then you only use 10 different commands to do most of the things that you want to do. And it's the same, I think, with these bits of software.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to give that one a go. I mean, I've got it, as I said. It's just that I started, it's one of these, I'm really, really lazy. So I started work on it. I thought, I'm going to have to work hard at understanding this. So back to Word I go. I'm gonna have to.
I think it's got a bit of a learning curve. I think I would imagine that if you sort of dedicate a couple of days to it, sort of looking at watching a few YouTube videos and a few tutorials, I reckon that if you can sort of get to understand the way it works, then after that it's plain sailing, really. Okay, and I only ever have any issues at certain stages in the phase of writing. When you finish the novel and you then got to output the whole novel into Word or something, at that point, you might have a few hiccups as you're sort of learning that phase. But the actual writing itself is incredibly easy. And then once you learn how to do the outputting, sort of. But it's there's a lot of information out there now. It's very popular, so you find lots of videos and things.
Yeah, I think I'll save that for my next in between books moment.
Yes, those moments when you think, now I've got loads of time, and then a week later you're writing the next book.
Well, that's the thing, I felt like coming back here for a bit of a break and Christmas and stuff, and then you just discover you've got a sort of 5 foot high, mail has built up, and then there's all the other things, all the people, relatives you have to go and see, and it's Christmas.
It's Christmas,
Presents.
Yeah, well, I know it's and it's always that thing that the problem is not buying for other people. It's when they say, "What do you want?" And you think, well, actually, I'll tell you something. Not a lot, because having moved out to Mauritius and living out of a suitcase for about 3 or 4 months before the first batch of books turned up. So we've just had a laptop, about 4 or 5 books, pens, paper, that sort of thing, and a change of clothes, and that's all I had for about. Let's say 4 months. Didn't miss a bloody thing.
Amazing, right? It's amazing.
Yeah. So now I come back here and I look around and I'm just kind of like horrified at the level of clutter. And I've really got to, do something about it because it's driving me nuts. Having discovered that you can get by without stuff, you just suddenly give it away willy-nilly.
So Are you basically living like Jack Reacher then? How you have been living like Jack Reacher for the last sort of few months, where he just buys like one set of clothes and then wears them for a couple of days, then chucks them out and buys another set.
When they become so bloodstained,
yes, well, yeah. Once you've strangled a few people and headbutted a few people to death, then you've got to throw the clothes away. I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah. Oh well, I wish, but it's just it's a real eye opener, to be honest, and I'm kind of humbled by it, because I'm just thinking this is just ridiculous. So this year I've kind of really cut down on any kind of present requests, because apart from anything, I've got to get it, back to Mauritius in the suitcase, and there is an allowance. And when you start, sorry, I'll just show you. Well, no, there's the pile of things to go. Whoops, back down there.
All right.
So, that's a full suitcase in itself.
Yeah, I know. So we're allowed 2 suitcases, and then there's the carry-on bag, which of course is where all the laptops are going to go. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a great place to live, so I'm not complaining.
Well, one of the questions we had planned was to ask you about the move to Mauritius and how you're getting on there, and obviously it sounds like you're getting on very well. And how have you found the writing process there?
Well, the writing's actually a lot easier, because I'm not glued to watching the news and we're finding out which day of the week by which prime minister we've got, that sort of thing. So it's been a real liberation getting away from Brexit, the travails of the Conservative government, and each successive scandal that comes out and all that. And it does preoccupy you, because it's like the worst ever sitcom shit show that you're ever going to see, and the joke of it, of course, is we're the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
And so being as far away from that as possible, and Brexit, is very, very helpful. And I've been able to write actually a lot more than was the case in the UK. So I'm very pleased about that.
That's
and also,
interesting.
Writing a musical now, so that would never have happened if I hadn't gone out there.
It's not about the Romans, is it?
Sadly not,
No.
But one of the reasons we moved out there is so, we went out 4 years ago on a holiday, and at the airport, somebody came up to my wife and said, Louise. And she turned around and go, Michelle. And I thought, what the hell? Bloody Mauritian airport. Who the hell is this? And it was somebody she'd sung in a band with 20 odd years ago when she was living in Geneva. And they've retired to Mauritius, so we stayed in touch, and that's how we kind of decided to go there. And it turns out this is a band with a rather serious kind of historical significance in a way. They're the first band to have a pop video on the internet, and the first band to have, well, it was the first image on the internet was a picture of this band.
Oh wow!
And that's because the guy who set the band up was working at CERN. And Tim Berners-Lee was next door, busy cobbling together the internet. And he came through one day. He said, "Look, I just need a video and an image just to test this thing out on the. What do you got?" And Silvano said, "Here, well, have this image, have this video." So they went up on the internet. So they were the first graphics on the internet.
Oh wow,
that's amazing.
So every 10 years, the newspapers pile in and interview this group and sort of say, it's you made history, blah blah blah. So anyway, I thought, oh, what a great topic for a musical, because they've got this huge catalogue of songs that they've put together, and they're really fun because they're all about physics.
Is it pop music or?
Yeah, it's kind of sort of 60s,
right?
But very, very sort of catchy stuff. And the band's called Les Horribles Scenettes, so it's LHC. It's constantly singing about somebody's bewailing the fact that their boyfriend's always in the lab and doesn't care for them, things like this, and microwave love and things like that. So
sounds. So are you writing like a kind of Mamma Mia style musical with the music of the band?
I wish. If it's Mamma Mia, then my share of 2 billion looks good.
Yeah. That would be good.
Well, we'll keep. Is it the first musical? Yeah. Is it the first musical you've written?
Yeah. Well, this is why I'm trying to find. I've got the format sorted out now and started writing the story and stuff. So we're just sort of putting it together. And I've got the back catalogue of songs, and of course you're going through the lyrics and you're trying to work out which lyrics work best with which part of the story.
Yeah.
And then some of the lyrics are just killingly funny as well. So I've got to find a way of kind of putting that into a performance. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
It sounds like a real
That's interesting.
bit of a departure from what you've done up till now. So that's never a
Well,
bad thing, though.
no, I think this is always the thing about writing is that, and you'll know this, that you start doing a bit of research, start talking to people, and then get another idea, and then you do something else, you get another idea, and then you get this stack of ideas that you're going to be only about a quarter of the way through when you peg out.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. It's just an addiction, telling stories, really.
So how did you get started then, Simon? What inspired you to write books about the Romans?
Um, well, about the story writing actually started when I was at school because my parents are there's cool, brutal, callous middle class types who sort of send kids away to boarding school whilst they go off and travel around the world and have fun, which of course didn't go down terribly well with me when I used to get these postcards from Hawaii or whatever it was when I was middle of November in the common room, sort of freeze my arse off. So anyway, when the lights went out in the dormitory, we all took turns telling stories. And I got to me one night, and I was getting a bit tired, and I thought, and we shall continue tomorrow. Leave them on a cliffhanger. And so I continued the story the next day. And then after a while, I got the job full time. And you begin to work out when the stories are working well because everybody's silent and there's kind of stillness.
Right.
And when things are going slightly awry, when there's a bit of chatter and all the rest of it. And then you begin to develop the very, very basic storytelling skills of building something up and then leaving them on a cliffhanger, then coming back the next day and continuing the story and so on. So I had that all sort of pretty much mapped out pretty quickly. And then when I went to left that school and went to another school where we had this absolutely cracking Latin teacher, and I was really crap at the subject. I mean, the Latin O level, as it was in the day, was a fairly straightforward and easy thing to get through. You just had to memorize Tacitus. Wasn't any great shakes. So I wasn't very good at Latin. But when he stopped talking about Latin, started talking about the history, and then you're just thinking, wow, all this really cool and great stuff.
Why don't they teach you that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, they do. I mean, it's there on the kind of curriculum, but very much as an aside, they really want you to go do all that sort of Life of Brian, Roman Arnes Ites Domus stuff. So that's kind of where they steer you. And of course, going on holiday around Europe, you just keep coming across one Roman remain after another, and a combination of that, I think, got me really excited about Rome. And then, of course, you had, being slightly older than you guys, we had I, Claudius on television when I was growing up. And it seemed every Sunday afternoon it was something like Cleopatra or Demetrius and the Gladiators or Spartacus or, and so on. The Hall of the Roman Empire seemed to be on all the time for some reason. So that whole sword and sandal thing added to the history, added to the, visiting all these sites. So it was always there. And I think I probably actually did most of the research whilst I was at school. So yeah, and then when I thought about writing about Romans, that came a bit late in the day because I'd written 3 novels, the first 3 not published. They're in a dusty drawer down there somewhere. Right. And
these will come out after your death. There'll be those books that get published by people like 10 years after they've gone, and you buy them.
Have my way,
and you buy them and you read them. And you think, okay, so the estate needed some money. I get it, but I understand why they weren't published.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll leave them. Strict instructions that they're to be left lining hamster cages or something. That's all they're good for, really. But and it was really because I was, that classic sort of beginner writer mistake of going to the bookshops, looking at what's selling and thinking, yeah, well, I'll do that, Right. And your heart's not really in it, but, you just want to mimic that success. And, at the same time, I was thinking, what do I want to read? And I've just been introduced to Falco, Lindsay Davis's detective series, which is kind of Raymond Chandler in ancient Rome, and she does it really well. But at the same time, I was thinking, I really want something more military than detective. What is there? And of course, there wasn't anything at the time. It was all sort of emperors and generals and things like that. So I thought, well, okay, I'll write this one for me. And I think that's the point at which you realize that, you have to believe in the product. You have to believe in what you're writing.
Absolutely.
I think, was it Robert Frost made that comment about, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. There's no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And he's damn right.
And it's definitely true that it's very good advice to write a book that you want to read, because you could be pretty much sure that you're not going to be the only person on the whole planet that wants to read that same sort of type of story.
Yeah. But I think that's a pretty common mistake amongst people, starting out, is that they think, okay, well, what can I do that's going to sell a lot, rather than
just to make money.
Yeah. Which let's not decry that.
Oh no, not at all. No.
But if that's just actually, one of the reasons I'm out in Mauritius is to set up a creative writing course at the local university there. And my whole take on it is it's creative writing as a commercial activity. Because one of the things I've noticed when I've been along to a lot of the creative writing workshops and courses here is that, you ask people and their ambition is to make a living out of it, and they're quite open about that. Yeah. You think, well, why isn't that the starting point? Why is it all this kind of fine writing, blah, 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 blah. And then, oh, yes, and you may want to get an agent and publisher and this sort of thing. You should actually start from, okay, I want to make a living out of this. Okay, if this is the thing I want to write, then how am I going to monetize it? What sort of possibilities are there for, creating an income out of this? And so, you can't set up that kind of course here in the UK because, the creative writing mafia, for want of a better word, have, pretty much nailed down the format of the course. And anybody that sort of says, well, I'm here to make some money, or, I want to make a living out of it, is going to get looked at down a very long nose, I think. So the beauty of doing it in Mauritius is there's no creative writing courses there at all. So, there's a blank slate, and I can kind of set one up that, thinks about it more as a commercial proposition along with the writing. So,
but it's really interesting. There's a real split of writers and people in the writing establishment, or the publishing industry, or whatever you want to call it, in the UK of people. Obviously, the publishing industry is there to make money, but of writers, there's a real split of the writers who just think I'm creating art, and it's if I make money, well, that's well and good, but I want to write the next amazing novel, and if I make money out of it, that's brilliant. But then there's the other side of people that probably the middle-list writers who are just writing and they want to make a living out of it, and they do, hopefully, some of them, like us, succeed in making a living out of it.
But I think half of them probably just don't want to admit it. They'll say that they want to create art, whereas they really do want to make money, but they think they can't admit it.
Yeah. Well, it seems this is one of the problems with that kind of course and that kind of attitude is that, they make it sound like a bad thing. Actually, most people turn up to these courses, that's exactly what they want to do. The danger is that, if you just discourage if you just encourage the way of doing things at the moment that there is, you end up lots and lots of these people who write books which consist of, big words, small print, low sales. And then they eventually go on to become lecturers of creative writing. And then you just perpetuate this problem. And I think, I get really pissed off, actually, when people go, oh, yeah, you're, what's that lovely phrase that Ben Kane made into a T-shirt? Jaffrey.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Just another fucking Roman author.
Yes.
Was that Angus Donald that came up with that, or
he was a bit, apparently, so the story goes, I wasn't there that night, but Angus got a bit drunk, and and he was amongst Roman authors, and somebody had made some comment, and he sort of said, what do you know? You're just another fucking Roman author. So Jaffrey was born.
But
this is the thing, that there is a sort of you're just another commercial fiction writer.
Yes, snobbery.
There's the snobbery of genre fiction, as if genre fiction was somehow easy. It's like when people talk about, commercial movies not being good or whatever. You think, well, they're the ones that are making the, like Avatar 2, whatever, coming out now, it's cost I don't know how many millions, but it's going to make, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Because people enjoy it.
That's what people want to see.
Well, this is it. What is wrong with enjoying a story? And I remember that some years ago there was a big debate on I think one of the literary review magazines or something about should a writer concentrate on style or story. That was the big issue, and it was really, really interesting how and they broke it down so that the vast majority of people who thought that style was important lived in London, which I thought was really quite revealing. And those who are sort of more concerned with story were the sort of provincial types. And you're kind of thinking, well, style's fine, and style is something we can aspire to. And every so often we'll write a paragraph or a sentence where we feel very, very pleased.
Yeah.
And you read it back and you think, yeah, that's good. But at the same time, if that's all it ever was, and sometimes, I've read quite a few of these, because I was unfortunately in a men's reading group where a couple of the guys there were very much of that school. Well, if it's by a product of the creative writing, UEA, it must be good, and therefore we will read it. And you end up reading. I'm not a fan of Ian McEwan. I'm really not. And when you actually have to go through several of his books, and you begin to think, so you spent the last 20 pages talking about cooking ravioli, or 15 pages covering a squash game, or and then you have the most sort of preposterously unbelievable plot, and you're thinking, okay, there is a nicely written sentence here once in a while, but this is just
there's no story.
And
no hook.
What we're trying to do is I think one of the beauties of writing is that we are only half of the equation. You can be a good, or you can be a good or an indifferent writer. You can be a good or indifferent reader as well. And what do I try? I think the game is for me is to try and make it easy for good readers, so that in the sense that we put the black marks down on white paper. That's all we do. What they do is then take those black marks and turn them into magic in their heads. And the beauty of reading is that every single novel is going to be read differently by every single reader, and you're going to have this wonderful kind of double effort between the two of us to create this kind of magic. And I think that tends to get lost in the mix, so that there are good and bad readers as well as good and bad writers.
And
of course, when you go and see a movie, no matter how good Avatar is, it's going to be the same movie for everybody who watches it. Whereas if Avatar was a book, it's a unique experience for everybody.
Well, that's why it costs hundreds of millions to make Avatar, because you have to do all of that to make it unequivocal, so people can see exactly what you want them to see. And so the director can put on the screen and say, well, Cameron can say, this is exactly what I want people to see, whereas we can't do that. We can impart the knowledge that we want.
That's what I think I prefer about writing, actually, and I prefer about reading, is that it's so personal. It is so kind of creative in a way that going to the cinema isn't. Cinema, it's pretty passive. And you either like the story or you don't. You either analyze it or you don't. You've got very limited kind of options. As a reader, though, once you paid the entrance ticket price, you're the one that's kind of creating this.
Exactly.
Fantasy.
There's a creative aspect even when you're the reader.
Absolutely. And the reader can choose to skip bits. Lots of people say, well, I'm bored with that description, so I'll skip and go to the dialogue or whatever. You can choose to do that.
And you can pause, without having to hit the pause button, just to reread a sort of sentence, or to read it differently, or to stop and think about something, or to scribble in the margin. When can you scribble in the margin when you're watching a movie? And how often do we do that? I mean, I'm sure you do. I do. I mean, I'm sitting there with my kind of, not, highlighter or anything like that, but I've got a very, very fine point nib, so I can get plenty of notes in the margin. And if it's a sort of non-fiction thing, fine. Sometimes with fiction, though, I'll do it, because, if I'm reading something that really bowls me over, or I abhor, I want to know why. I want to know why it's having that effect on me. So I'll sort of think it through and make the comments in the margin. Which of course also mitigates against buying ebooks, of course. But there we go.
Well, you mentioned about the Jafra thing, so I was just curious. How do you feel about the amount of Roman novels that are out now and the authors? Because when you got some success, loads of people started doing it. I don't know if they copied you or not, but they certainly followed the same formula.
Yeah, I don't think, I'm not sure about copying. I think that the thing is, it's not so much that it's copying. I think it's the publishers. Once they actually see that there's a big market, and they sort of think, well, they're, over at Headline, they're doing well with this new sort of Scarrow guy. So what do we need something like that? And then the whole thing kind of rolls out along those something. And I'm pretty sure that there are, it's like anything that, in a kind of creative or business world, you're not necessarily the only one doing something, but the trick is being the first. And I think that I was lucky. And also, there are things that are outside of your control as well. it was let me see, it was a month after my first book came out. Gladiator appeared in the cinemas. You really
that's
could
great.
plan that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Perfect promotion.
Yeah. So people sort of make it. There's a tendency for some people to think, oh well, you've done 37 odd books. That it was a foregone conclusion, and they kind of read things retrospectively. You think, no, it's a lottery. What if Gladiator hadn't have been released?
Yeah.
What if the manuscript had gone to the an editor whose list was full? What if the agent I'd sent it to on the day who accepted it had got a bad hangover or had read one too many bad Roman books? That's the reality.
Or if Gladiator had been bad, and so instead of being like really good publicity, everyone had gone, "Ugh, Romans, the rubbish." That movie was terrible, and it all dropped like a stone. But
well, I don't think that Britannia television series has done anybody in Rome any favors.
No. So, there was a Beowulf series a while back, and I managed to watch 20 minutes of one episode before I gave up on it. So yeah.
Well, it's hard, isn't it? Because when somebody comes out with something that you think you really want to be a success,
you want to enjoy it, yeah.
and you just think, oh no.
I know, it's terrible because the build-up of seeing that, this program's coming out, that could be great, and then you sit down that first night and think, oh no, what have they done? This is just terrible.
Yeah. I had that with there was some crime series on the telly called Inside Man, David Tennant and Tucci.
Okay, yeah.
And and you think Stephen Moffat, okay, well, it should be okay, but you're just waiting for it, you painfully, because they're two really good actors, quite meaty roles, but this story is so bad, and you just
didn't work.
Well, it was kind of cringingly bad. People, it was one of these things where the guy had actually worked out the story and then gone back and made sure all the characters did everything they could to make the plot work, rather than sort of acting in, true to their character or anything like this. So it was just, Deus Ex Machina on every page, and that really kind of hurts when you're reading it or seeing it on the screen even.
Yeah. So I know lots of our listeners are going to be thinking, ask him more about Macro and Cato and his historical fiction novels, because we're kind of talking about writing in general and things, which is all really interesting. But I'm just going to take it back to a couple of things we've already talked about. So we talked about, you've got 21 novels in the big series, the Eagles of the Empire series. So how many of them, because you talked about, you had some of the characters and some of the events are sort of seeded early on, and then you brought them back and you sort of bring things to fruition. You've already mentioned there's going to be another one featuring Boudica, I think, again. But how many have you got planned in total, and have you got a total plan?
I never had a total plan. When we got the original publishing deal, my agent said, how many do you think you're going to write? And I thought, well, 9, 10 if I'm lucky. And she said, well, don't count on more than 6. Because this is how these things tend to work out in the end. And the publisher commissioned 3 in the first instance. And I said, well, we'll see how it goes if there's going to be a second deal. So, you have no idea how well it's going to go. And I hadn't planned it out. And I don't plan things out now. I can sort of see that there's a story arc that may be one novel. It might be 2 or 3 novels, possibly. But that's as far as it goes. There's no sort of big plan, for the entire series. And then there's no big plan either within each novel. I mean, when I start it, I know who the villain's going to be. I know where it's going to be set. I know what the main problem that they've got to resolve is for the book. That's a half side of A4, and then we write.
Yep.
So, and it's because I want that frosting again. I want to live the story as I'm writing it. I don't want to know what's coming next. I want the guys to actually work it out for me. And the beauty of it is, of course, that they will do stuff. They will say things.
Unexpected.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
When that happens, you just think, well, I'm shocked. And you think, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be surprised, then hopefully the reader will.
I've had moments when people have contacted me and said, "You killed so and so, character in the story," and I said, "No, I didn't." I said, "Hang on a minute, I just wrote it down."
Yeah.
Somebody, I didn't kill him. Some guy.
Write what you know, hey.
Yeah. But yes, because sometimes it just happens, and you're just you maybe don't expect a certain character to get killed or to kill another character, and then suddenly you're in a moment and think, oh,
well,
actually,
as I said about seeding stuff. I remember early in one of the early books, Macro, going on about the some bloody marine his mother had run off with, when he was young.
I remember that.
Yeah, and there's about 4 or 5 books later, and Macro and Cato have got to go and do some sort of thing with the Roman Navy in the Adriatic.
I guess who he meets.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I hadn't thought about it. Even as he was there was this column of recruits marching to Ravenna under this old veteran, and they, and I didn't think about it. And they were just getting on really, really well. And the guy said, "Well, look, I'm on the verge of retiring. When we get to Ravenna, come down to the bar I own and meet my squeeze." And I thought, okay. So then anyway, they're in the bar, and then and she goes, here she is now. And as I was typing it, so Macro looked up and said, "Hello, Mum." And I thought, what?
This is stuck in my head. I remember this very distinctly, even though I must have read it years ago.
Yeah,
it's obviously a good scene.
Well, there's a big punch up, realize he puts 2 and 2 together.
but as you said though, it's a shock for you when you were writing it, and it obviously shocked Stephen when he read it as well. So I mean, that's the magic there, isn't it?
That's it, the magic, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I think you can't afford to. I mean, it depends on what you're writing. If you're doing Wellington and Napoleon, you've got a very limited scope for doing that.
Yeah.
Although, you find out some nice little nuggets where, for example, Napoleon had a rabbit shoot organized for the imperial court. And unfortunately, one of his soldier he put in charge of organizing this didn't realize there's a difference between wild rabbits and tame rabbits. And so he'd bought a whole load of tame rabbits, and they let the cages open, expecting them all to bolt so they could be shot. And they kind of ambled out. Yeah,
nibbled the grass,
and sort of came up and sort of nibbled people's fingers and looked at them endearingly. And
you couldn't shoot them, could you?
Well, it caused a bit of I had it with Napoleon, obviously absolutely outraged, and he sort of scrambles back into his coach in a foul temper, and then freezes because sitting opposite him is a rabbit, eyeing him curiously. So, I mean, sometimes, you can come across something that's factual, and you can spin it slightly to surprise the reader. But if you're doing something like Macro and Cato, where the big history is in the background, and with Macro and Cato, you can sort of they can do that. They can surprise you. They can do their own thing, and it's great being an amanuensis really when they're at work.
Well, I wanted to ask how you keep track of all these books, the Macro and Cato ones, because I remember picking one up more than once and starting to read it. And then I get quite a few chapters in, I realise that I've already read it. Because, the covers are quite similar and the titles are quite similar. So how do you keep track of it?
I'd love to say I've got a very sort of thorough card index and all this stuff. And the answer is I don't. And you try and keep as much in your head as possible, but and I really should actually have some sort of database for all this,
document or something,
because it can go horribly wrong. We'd got to almost galley proofs, I think, with one of the books where I was driving my oldest son to Scouts, and he said, "So what's the latest one about then?" So I said, "Oh, it's about this guy who's the son of Telemachus, who's the son of this guy in an earlier book." My son looked at me and he said, "No, he's not. That's not his name. His name's Ajax." And I said, "You sure?" "Absolutely, Dad. I've read all the books. I know." And having a younger, slightly more accurate mind, he was right. So we were able to catch that one, But it was really funny. You do this thing, and I'm sure it's as much a function of age as stupidity. But you have this when you remember something very, very clearly, and it's 100% wrong.
Yeah. False memory.
I noticed that I've got like lists of Anglo-Saxon names and lists of Visigothic names and Frankish names, whatever, and I'll use one in a book, and then the next book a name will crop up in I'll end up using it again, and I'll only find it when I get to like the editing stage. Hang on a minute, this was it's the same name that I gave, a side character in the. I mean, obviously, certain names just sound good to me, and I think, well,
there's only so many of them.
A great name, but there's like a list, and some of them I think, oh, that sounds rubbish. That sounds rubbish. And this one's good, and I end up using the same bloody name again.
Yeah, you have to be careful of that. There's only so many times you can put Biggest Dickus in a row.
Silly Sodus.
Yeah.
So you mentioned
buttocks.
Yes. Do you find this wheezable? So you've said you're writing this musical at the moment. Have you got, apart from the music, are you writing a novel as well, or are you one of these people that writes just one thing and then finishes that and moves on to the next? Or
no, the thing is, I'm a guy. You know how it is. We do one thing at a time, and not necessarily well. I really wish I could multitask. So it's going to be, I'm doing roughing out this sort of musical stuff now. Then in January, I've got to start the next Macro and Cato book.
Okay.
Then I've got to do, I can work on two things at once if I'm co-writing. So I'll be working on that. And at the same time, I'm working with TJ on a Karatakis trilogy. So, we're doing, the Roman invasion from the other side, which is a lot of fun, actually. I'm particularly enjoying this one because we've got it down as a Roman historian who's sick of writing these kind of hagiographies of aristocrats. And he comes across Karatakis in exile in Rome and says, well, here's a really good story, really interesting guy. And then, he becomes aware of the fact that Karatakis is telling him the story that Karatakis wants to tell, and that he needs to sort of catch, make sure that this is true. And at the same time, he's being pressured by the high-ups in Rome, sort of saying, you sure you really want to be writing this story? Not really good for your career or your life. So he's having to. So it's very much, how does history get written, particularly in difficult political situations? So as well as telling Karatakis' story. So we're having a lot of fun with that. So that's being co-written at the same time as I'll be doing the next Macro and Cato. And then I should catch a break in April, I think, where I'll do some more of the musical before I start the next German detective novel to finish towards the end of the year. So, it tends to be about 3 or 4 projects.
There's lots going on.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
So how did your collaboration come about with TJ Andrews, and how does it work?
Well, I'd co-written a film script with my brother some years before, and the way it worked seemed to go pretty well. So I wrote the first in screenplay, 20 minutes or so. Then I'd hand it over to him, and he'd edit what I've done, and then he'd do the next 20 minutes, and then we'd flip it back and do that. And occasionally we'd sort of meet up and discuss how things were going and ideas we had. And because we were on the same wavelength, it worked out quite well. So I thought, well, okay. When Headlines suggested, what about doing a sort of an ebook series with TJ? And I said, okay. We started writing this, and originally Headline wanted it to go out under my name. No mention of him at all. And I thought, well, we're not having that really, because and I didn't realize that they were, because my agent didn't tell me that the cut was sort of 65% me, 35% him, which she said, well, that's really, really good for ghostwriters. A lot of them get less than that. And I thought, well, this is no way to proceed, so we had a little rejig. So it's 50-50, because I think that's probably fair, and it stops any arguments or any resentment.
Yeah.
And also TJ's name goes on the cover. And and I think
that's a big difference, because I wondered about that, because I was looking, and obviously we said that TJ has done ghostwriting for other people, but normally and very often ghostwriters don't get a mention at all, on covers.
Well, I think that's pretty scandalous.
Yeah, that seems unfair. Yeah,
because I know people that have ghostwritten stuff, and they get a fee, and that's it, and it's terrible. Because it doesn't help you for your curriculum. For your resume, you can't say really openly. I wrote.
No, but I mean, and in good conscience, how can you work under those sort of
take the credit for somebody else's writing?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a very conservative thing to do, and of course we don't like that. So, so that's kind of how that happened. And then with TJ, it was because we get on really well. That's always a good plus. And he's a very creative thinker. He's been doing a lot of writing, under his own name and under other people's names for a long time. And he's an ex-editor as well, so he knows the score.
Yeah.
And it's really nice when we have one of our creative meetings where we just sit there and you say, well, we've done this and this is where the character's going, and then somebody will say, well, what if we do it this way? You think, yeah, shit, why didn't I think of that? That's really good. Let's go that. And so the whole thing works really organically and builds itself up, and I think it can be a really, really productive experience. And we've done 3 books now, and we've got the 4th one we've finished, and we're going. There's another 2 that we're going to write for sure. And then I have an idea for sort of a young macro series we could co-write as well.
Okay,
that would be good.
So how does the actual writing part of it work? So you do the brainstorming, the creative part of coming up with the story.
I mean, I do the first 20,000 words to get the thing kicked off, because in this case with the Karatakis, I wanted a very, very distinct voice for this Roman historian. So I was thinking kind of mentally sort of David Starkey with a toga, and okay, so you have to give it that kind of voice, that way of looking at things, and it's from his first person, from his point of view. And then when we meet Karatakis and we get in to go back into history, same thing. You need to have a sense of how that will look. So once you sort of set a baseline style, a house style for the book, and then we can sort of start talking about the plot. And then TJ kicks in and we sort of redo the first bit. He adds a bit on, and we go from there, backwards and forwards.
Oh, that's really interesting, because I wondered if, you came up with the storyline and just said, here you go, I've written a 2 sides of A4, now write a novel. But it's not like that. It's much more collaborative.
Well, it's far too much fun to want to let everybody else have all the fun.
Yeah.
So that's why. And also, I think, well, if we're splitting it 50-50, then I've got, dibs on 50% of the content, for me to write and, mess around with. So, and it has to be that way, because I once got involved with a couple of other writers, and we were going to set up this thing called Story Architects, where we pooled our ideas and research, and then the whole thing fell apart because everybody say, well, if it's my idea, then I should get 80% of it, and you should get 20%. And you think, well, we're now going to spend all our time talking about percentages.
That's like being in a band when the band's like, well, I wrote this bit of that song, so I need to have this credit, and I want that percentage. And it's tough.
So you have to, just solve all your problems at the start and say 50%, 50-50, and you get your name on the book. Then there's no arguments. Tim's happy, I'm happy, and the whole thing's fairly seamless. And I would, if you haven't done it yet, it's certainly something I would give a go, because it's so different from writing.
Yeah, it's something I've every now and again thought about. People have said, like, because we're doing the podcast again, said, "Oh, have you and Stephen thought about doing a book together?" And I think, well, no, I haven't. We hadn't. But we both thought no, but who knows? Maybe one day.
I'll give him
I'll give you 2 sides of A4 and tell you to write it, and we'll split it 50-50. Sounds good to me.
I'll do that, but I want 65.
You see, this is how
this is
so trouble.
Oh no, what's going to happen? You mentioned, so moving on quickly before we fall out. You mentioned earlier about writing a screenplay with your brother, Alex Scarrow.
Yeah.
And I've actually got a question already about that, but that flows nicely into this. So very recently, I mentioned Jack Reacher, and Lee Child's done this thing where he's kind of retiring and then handing over to his brother, who's also a writer,
to rename himself.
Who has to rename himself to carry on the family business. And is that something that you would consider doing with your brother? Is it something that you can you imagine that happening, that you can sort of say, well, I don't want to write any more Macro and Cato, but how about you take on the
Well, he did. There was when we were still talking, and that's another issue. He was writing something called the Time Riders series, for a young adult series for Penguin, about this sort of agency that's set up to, because time travel is being created, so this agency's been set up to stop people manipulating time. So he said, well, can I use Macro and Cato I'm writing one about Rome. And I said, well, yeah, you can, but you've got a real challenge there, because it's for kids, and Macro is not kid language friendly. So anyway, so he did. There's this thing called Gates of Rome, and I think it's the 5th book in the series. And I was really impressed, to be honest. He had Caligula wasn't assassinated because Caligula has discovered this time traveler in ancient Rome and used his technology to stay in power. So Cato is now head of the Praetorian Guard and constantly sort of tidying up behind Caligula. Macro's retired and gone into real estate. And, it was just really interesting, because he sounded like Macro without swearing, and I didn't know that was possible. So, all credit to him for that. But I think, but the trouble is, because of the family situation, I'm afraid that any further kind of collaboration with him is completely out of the question until he shows a little bit of contrition.
Well. Okay.
Family, eh?
Family,
yeah.
It's like bloody EastEnders, isn't it? Yeah.
I'll move on from this.
Let's cast it. We'll draw a veil over that and move on.
Do you have any particularly interesting research stories, Simon?
Well, yeah. Well, not. I mean, only insofar as I like to go to where the books are set. And when I was writing the Eagle in the Sand, I think that's the one. So I think it's the 5th book in the series. I think it might have been the 5th or 6th. I can't remember. But anyway, I was still teaching at the time, and I thought, well, how am I going to get to this fort? Because I'd seen it on the website. I'd done the research on the internet, and there's this fort called Qasr Bashir in the Jordanian desert. And I thought, well, I really want to go and see that because it's the best preserved Roman fort anywhere in the world. And I thought, well, how the hell am I going to get there? So I was thinking this through, and then one day as I was teaching, my phone went off, and of course it's that kind of, oh no, because you bollock the students for, if their phone goes off, and it happens to you, total schadenfreude moment. So anyway, I answered the phone, and this guy said, "Is that Simon Scarrow?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "My name's Timur Dagestani. I'm the Jordanian ambassador. And big fan of your books, and so is a friend of mine, the King of Jordan, and he, His Majesty wonders if you'd like to come out to Jordan to see the ancient ruins there." And I'm thinking, this student's really good. I'm really impressed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Really, that's nice. Yeah. So His Majesty would like me to. Yes, Mrs. Scarrow. And he could see he was feeling a bit. Why is he being a bit funny? And I'm thinking this student is bloody good. Whoever they've got doing this is really terrific. And then it cost a penny drop, and it was real. So to cut the story short, we went out to Jordan, and we were sort of shown around for a couple of weeks. And he said, "Is there anything particular you want to see?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to see this fort in the desert." And he said, "Well, I've never heard of it." And so he got his Minister of Tourism in. And he said, "Have you heard of this place?" And he said, "No, I've never heard of this." He said, "Well, there is a guy who might, Samer Musha, who's a sort of film scout working for the Jordanian Film Commission that they just set up." So they got this guy Samer, and he said, "Yeah, I know. I scouted it a few years ago. It's in the middle of the desert. Nearest town's Al-Qatrana. I can guide you there by phone if you like." So the king said, "Yeah, okay, no problem. We'll sort that out for you." So anyway, next day or so, he lent me one of his land cruisers and one of his bodyguards, a guy called Murad, who was so cool, I included him in the book, because he had a trunk full of guns and stuff. And he had this kind of weird laser eyes. So if anybody cut us up on the road, he'd sort of plop alongside them and glare at them, and then sort of swerve off and crash into the desert. I mean, he was cool. And my son loved him. He thought he was absolutely rocked. So anyway, so we drive out into the desert. And so Murad's on the phone in one hand, driving in the other, and getting the directions off Samer Moshe. So we find this Roman fort. And it was fantastic. The only damage that had been done to it was by an earthquake a couple of hundred years earlier, which had flattened some of the interior buildings. But the walls were there, the towers were there.
Wow.
Climb up to the towers, look over the desert, all there. I thought, nobody's been here. There's no sign of rubbish or anything like that. And because it's sufficiently far away from the nearest settlement, nobody's used the stones to recycle for buildings. So it's all still there. So, it's an absolutely fabulous experience visiting this place. And then when I was, the trouble is I was talking about it in interviews and stuff afterwards. And then a couple of years later, I got an email from a French guy saying, "Yeah," he said, "I really like the books and stuff. And, this thought sounded great. So I thought I'd have a rave there." So he'd basically used this fort as a site for a rave.
Oh, God.
And they trashed the place.
Oh, no.
So, I mean, well, they didn't. There's a limit to how much trash the Roman fort can do, but you can leave a lot of rubbish around, that's for sure. So I thought, you have to be a little bit careful in future. If you come across something, you don't tell everybody.
Yeah, keep it a secret.
Yeah, gosh, that's
yeah.
Still nice to have. Nice to have readers, not so much like the.
The next the sort of follow up to this, don't you?
What?
Did you go to one?
No. I was talking to Timor in Cambridge the other day, and he was talking about your book.
Mine.
Yeah.
I'm pretending that I didn't know this, but yeah, you actually,
yeah. So, he said, he really likes it because, he said the King's a real big, he really likes the way that you've kind of created this thing where people go into battle and they're not all kind of heroic and all the rest of it. They're just kind of pissing themselves and hoping that nothing happens to them, whilst they're fighting. And he said, because that's how it is, So, if you get that call,
I was going to say, if I get that call, I'm going to have to think quickly about writing a book set in Jordan. So we'll make sure he hears about this. So where? Well, I'm sure I can think of something to write in Jordan. I mean,
Well, you will now. Yeah.
I will now. Yeah. If I get the call, I won't think it's a sort of a student taking the piss. At least I don't have any students to.
Yeah.
So, well.
So that's the research story. Sorry.
That's the research story. It's a good one.
That's good.
It's a good one.
Yep.
And the rest of it's pretty boring, actually. It's just lots of talking to reenactors. And there's one guy, actually, I tell you, reenactors are really useful. And there's also this strand of historian researcher who actually recreates the stuff to test it and doesn't, trust the original sources. A guy called Peter Connolly. I don't know if you've come across his book.
Peter Connolly.
Greece and Rome at War. It's a lovely, beautifully illustrated book because he started out as an illustrator. But he completely killed something I've been told about Roman javelins at school, and many times, in the text, that these javelins were designed. They were so clever because they would throw them, and the sort of tang would bend, so they couldn't throw it back. And he said that's absolute rubbish. I spent 2 years building javelins and throwing them sheets of plywood, and I couldn't get it. Never could I get that to happen. So the long tang there is, it's there to basically penetrate the shield far enough to skewer the guy behind it. That's all it's there for.
Yeah.
All the stuff about it bending and not being.
Funnily enough, the Romans designed a weapon that was just designed to kill people.
Yeah. Well, who knew?
Who knew? So we designed this sword so we can stick it in your guts. We designed this spear so it would just skewer you. Yeah.
We designed this sword so crappily that nobody would ever want to use it against you. For God's sake. So he'd sort of taken that as his first principle and thought, well, why would you design a defective weapon?
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense because you have got those sort of weapons that have got barbs that are designed that you can't pull them out. That's obviously.
They have to go. Well, there's a lovely book on Roman medicine that a friend gave me, and it was talking about arrow extraction. And,
it's with the feathers.
Well, you have to push it through.
Yeah.
In the same direction. You can't take it back.
Exactly.
So you have to create an incision, reach through, pull it through from the other side. And it was describing it in some detail. And I thought, I think I put that in one of the books actually, where Macro gets pegged by an arrow.
Well, I've just put one similar to that in a book, but they actually used feathers. So if you picture the arrowhead, kind of V shape and the pointy part, they put feathers on the sharp part and pull it out using the feathers almost, so it doesn't rip your skin out. It's hard to describe, but there's actually a video on YouTube, a guy that shoves it into a big block of meat, and then he gets the feathers and pushes them in, and then you can pull the whole arrow out. I would imagine it's still absolute agony. But it
I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah, but it doesn't rip all your flesh apart on the way out.
No. So I had a again, you can use these experiences if you're unlucky enough to have them. I had a really bad accident when I was skiing when I was a kid, and I had sort of tumbled over and got a ski caught between my legs, and it ripped open my thigh. Right. And it was really interesting because I was the last person coming down the mountain, and the lifts had closed. So I had to sort of walk back up to the top of the cable car, wake the guy up to take me down. It was a small ski resort, and there was no doctor there. And so somebody had to call in a medic from a local Alpine regiment who was exercising in the area. And he didn't have any kind of, anything to knock me out or anything like that. So he had to he went out and made some snowballs to pack around the wound to cool it down and numb it. And then he stitched up the muscle inside. So the muscle had severed. So you'd had to put it back and overlap it and then stitch it up and then pull the skin over and do this. And the whole thing took about an hour. Oof. And it was really, really interesting, from the point of view of initially when the shock kicked in. And I was looking down at my leg and I could see this flap muscle and this, ripped open thigh. And I was thinking, but it doesn't hurt.
Right.
This is really, really strange. And it only really started hurting when he started, sewing it all back up. And then you begin to realize just how painful something like that can be, and that you have to keep still. And, all the strategies, mental strategies you kind of develop for, as you're doing it, think about something else or focus on holding something really, really tightly, just to get you through it.
It's funny how adrenaline works. I broke my leg when I was younger and I actually snapped in half.
Nice.
I get hit by a car, but like you, there was no pain. I can distinctly remember pushing myself off the road with a leg flopping up and down, but there was no pain whatsoever. And I just pulled myself off and lay in the road until the ambulance came. And then it started to get sore later on, but it's funny, the adrenaline, the shock,
Isn't a strange thing. It really is. Who would have thought that something like that would,
not hurt, Yeah.
No, not hurt in the instant, but later on.
Eventually, it did eventually.
Yeah. But I guess
a slightly, difficult problem insofar as this thing cutting my thing's about an inch below my balls. Okay.
Right.
So every evening, there was a nurse who was going out, one of the PE teachers had taken on sick, so she would have to change the dressing. And everybody would crowd round, taking bets on whether I get an erection or not while she was changing the. Oh, God, I tell you, that was humiliating. And that required huge self-control.
Okay, right. Yeah.
You have to think of broccoli or something instead.
I like the way you used the word huge there with such emphasis.
Well, actually, I had a hot tip for that. Somebody said, think about Mrs. Thatcher in a cat suit. Worked every time.
Right, moving on.
Yeah, please.
Well, we've been talking for about an hour, which is normally sort of what we aim to do. But I think you've got one more question.
How much of this are you going to have to edit out,
Stephen? Well, probably half of it. I don't know. Stephen, you got a question there.
Is this a Christmas one?
Yeah. Do you want to ask?
Yes. Well, it's Christmas time, and when I used to work as a meter reader, I always took the Christmas period off as holidays. But one year, my manager refused, and I was so angry that I actually spent the entire time sitting in my car, and I managed to read 2 of your novels rather than going out to work. So that taught them a lesson, hopefully. I certainly enjoyed it anyway. So I have very fond memories of that year, but is your Christmas any different now in Mauritius? But, well, we know it's not, Matthew, so I don't know why you told me to ask that.
Because
he's not there.
Well, he's not there, but you could have reworded the question slightly.
Well, I never realised until I got to the end what I'd said. Well, I suppose New Year will be different, won't it?
Well, this is it. So I thought you were going to lead in with the. So what are you going to do? When you go back to Mauritius now that it's Christmas and
No, well, I don't know what the deal is in Mauritius. Actually, I mean, they have so many religious festivals there because this is one of the things I really like about it. People are amazing. So there's 50% Hindu, there's 30% Muslim, and 20% Christian. And they've kind of cottoned on to the fact that rather than have any kind of religious strife, we get to enjoy each other's holidays.
Right. All the holidays,
So they have loads and loads of public holidays, and so they're very, very happy to celebrate each other's, holidays.
Well, we've been talking for over an hour now. Hopefully, we don't have to edit too much out. Although, obviously, a few bits of Simon's rather fruitier language we'll have to edit out or leave in. Maybe beep out. Yeah, we'll beep it out. Yeah. We ask each of our guests a series of the same questions at the end. And the first of those questions are, what have you been reading recently and what have you been watching recently?
Okay. Reading, I'm reading Victor Klemperer's diaries. So he was a Jewish guy who sort of became a Protestant when he married his wife in Germany. And it's from 1933 through to 45. He survived, by hook or by crook, and so it's very much a kind of, he doesn't concentrate on the big things. It's all about the day-to-day life of living as someone who's gradually being ground down by all this sort of process. So it's really, really interesting, and it just reminds you about the kind of quotidian awfulness of living in a regime like that, where it's so petty-minded, it's so kind of the small things, the small indignities that grind you down, even before the Holocaust and that sort of stuff kicks off. So, and it's, one of a series of books I'm reading. The one before that was Culture in Nazi Germany. It's a big, thick book. And basically it's about how there was no culture in Nazi Germany and how they basically ruined the film industry, ruined the art, ruined sculpture, ruined literature, all this sort of stuff. So, and you kind of read this and then you look at what's going on in our own country and the kind of cultural Philistines who are running the show. And so, yeah, those sorts of books I'm afraid I'm reading at the moment. But what have I seen recently? Well, I tell you, I one of the great delights of flying on Emirates is they have a channel devoted to classic cinema.
All right.
So on the way back, I watched two films which I'd seen long ago, and I'd forgotten how brilliant they were. One was Double Indemnity, which was based on a Stephen King novel. So it's sort of that hard-boiled, 1930s type of thing. Really, crackling dialogue and smart story and things like that. And the other one was something I'd only seen part of, which was The Bicycle Thieves.
Okay.
It's this Italian movie, which I'd heard, everybody puts it, when you speak, hear a lot of directors talking about, oh yeah, one of my top 10 movies. And you're thinking, a story about, set in Rome where somebody steals someone's bike, and they try and get it back. How exciting can that be? And then you watch this film and you think, yeah, no, I get it. I get it now. It is absolutely astonishing. And I think it's that, we tend to get sort of caught up in this, constant cutting edge of modernity and so on. And you forget that there was a time when people actually wrote literate film scripts and, concentrated on, just telling a very simple story as beautifully as possible. Now it's all kind of CGI. And it's that thing again about living out of a suitcase. You realize that what the essentials are that make life worthwhile, and rewarding. And I think it's seeing a film like The Bicycle Thieves just kind of puts that into that context. While sitting in a horribly uncomfortable chair being fed plastic food, for 7.5 hours. But yeah. So
last one then. What have you been listening to, and do you listen to music when you write?
Well, I always have a soundtrack on when I'm writing, and it has to be a soundtrack. It can't be any lyrics because that's distracting.
Yeah, everybody's basically saying much the same thing when we ask them.
Yeah, so it tends to be Lord of the Rings because the Howard Shore.
Howard Shore, yeah.
Brilliant music. So it tends to be that, or it's Gladiator, or it's Master and Commander, which they're all cracking soundtracks.
I don't think Master and Commander is one that's on my list, but I definitely listen to Gladiator and the other one. So yeah, I will.
And then when I'm, in down mode, I'm working my way through the Green Day catalog at the moment,
right? Which
is they're just amazing, frankly. And sometimes, if you can get a DVD of the videos as well. So when I'm doing Christmas wrapping or something, I can sit there and watch endless Green Day videos. And some of them are really, really good. So,
great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, that brings us to the end of our chat. So thank you ever so much for your time, Simon,
thank you.
coming on.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Matthew, it's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been brilliant.
Good luck with the books, guys.
Sorry, I missed that.
Good luck with the books.
Oh,
and you.
Thank you.
I would say of all the authors, I think you and Bernard Cornwell are probably our two heroes, really. Mine, anyway.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah, definitely. Biggest inspiration.
So we've peaked early because we've had you both on in the first
exactly.
year,
I don't know where we go next.
Yeah, well, yeah. But Bernard is. He's obviously a great interview subject. I mean, he's absolutely cracker.
Yeah,
and
we
he's
had
a real
fun.
good raconteur.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think next is we'll have to get Lee Child and Stephen King on next year. See.
Yeah, that would be good. J.K. Rowling.
Yeah. Well, of course, Harry Sidebottom's always good value for money.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have him on eventually. I'm sure.
But
there's lots of historical fiction authors that we've got lined up. So for anyone listening to this, there's lots more writers that will be coming on in the new year, I'm sure, and musicians and all sorts we got lined up as well. So it'll be fun.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll definitely tune in then. Now I know about it. In the meantime, have a great Christmas.
You too,
and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much, Simon.
That's it for today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. Please let us know if you have any questions or things you'd like us to cover in future episodes. You can contact us on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/rockpaperswordspodcast, or on Twitter. Our handle there is @rock_swords.
You can find out more about our books at matthewharvey.com and stephenamackay.com. We're also both on Twitter and Facebook and love to hear from readers and listeners, so drop by and say hi.
The theme music is written and performed and copyrighted by us. Until next time, a Rock, Paper, Swords, it's goodbye from me, Matthew Harvey.
And it's goodbye from me, Stephen A. Mackay.
And remember, whatever action and adventure you have going on in your life, be kind.
Stay safe.
And happy reading.
Okay.